health of a woman is involved, I think the government has to be respectful. I supported, in fact, a bill in the Senate that would have prohibited late-term abortions except in cases where the health or life of the mother was involved. I did not support the so-called partial birth abortion bill because it would have prohibited abortion, that form of abortion, at any stage of the pregnancy, regardless of the effect on the health and life of the woman, and that's unacceptable.
This question is for you, Senator. If Yugoslavia's Slobodan Milosevic prevails, notwithstanding the election results, would you support his overthrow?
Well, there is good news from Belgrade today, Bernie, as you know, but it's unconfirmed. The encouraging news is that the state news agency is reporting that Mr. Kostunica is the president-elect. And there are some press reports, but they're unconfirmed, that Milosevic has actually left Belgrade. Now that is a very happy ending to a terrible story, and it's the end of a reign of terror. If that is not confirmed and does not happen, then I think the United States, with its European allies, ought to do everything we can to encourage the people of Serbia to do exactly what they've been doing over the last few days, to rise up and end this reign of terror and bring themselves, by Milosevic, and bring themselves back into the family of nations where they will be welcomed by the United States and others. You know, I'm very proud on this night, as it appears that Milosevic is about to or has fallen, of the leadership role the United States played in the effort to stop his aggression and genocide in Bosnia and Kosovo. I know our opponents have said that they thought that was an overreaching. It wasn't. It was a matter of principle and America's national interest and values. And the fact is that we stopped the aggression, we stopped the genocide, and therefore strengthened our relationship with our European allies in NATO, and in fact made the United States more respected and trusted by our allies and more feared by our enemies. I think that Vice President Gore played a critical role, passionate, purposive role in leading the administration, along with Republican supporters like Bob Dole and John McCain, to do the right thing in the Balkans. And hopefully tonight we are seeing the final results of that bold and brave effort.
Secretary Cheney.
Well, I noted, Bernie, that like Joe, certainly I'm pleased to see what's happened in Yugoslavia today. I hope it marks the end of Milosevic. I think probably more than anything else, it's a victory for the Serbian people. They've taken to the streets to support their democracy, to support their vote. In some respects, this is a continuation of a process that began 10 years ago all across Eastern Europe and has only now arrived in Serbia. We saw it in Germany, we saw it in Romania, we saw it in Czechoslovakia as the people of Eastern Europe rose up and made their claim for freedom. And I think we all admire that. I think with respect to how this process has been managed most recently, we want to do everything we can to support Mr. Milosevic's departure. Certainly, though, that would not involve committing U.S. troops. I do think it's noteworthy that there appears to be an effort underway to get the Russians involved. I noted the other night, for example, Tuesday night in the debate in Boston, Governor Bush suggested exactly that, that we ought to try to get the Russians involved to exercise some leverage over the Serbians, and Al Gore poo-pooed it. But now it's clear from the press that in fact that's exactly what they were doing, and that that Governor Bush was correct in his assessment and his recommendation. He has supported the administration on Kosovo. He lobbied actively against passage of the Byrd-Warner provision, which would have set a specific deadline, one he felt it was too soon for forcing U.S. troops out. So he's been supportive of the policy that we've seen with respect to Yugoslavia. And I think he deserves a lot of credit for that. I'd go beyond that. I think this is an opportunity for the United States to test President Putin of Russia. That in fact now is the time when we ought to find out whether or not he is indeed committed to democracy, whether or not he's willing to support the forces of freedom and democracy diplomatically in the area there of Eastern Europe. And it's a test for him, in effect, or whether he represents the old guard in the Soviet Union. One of the most important challenges we face as a nation is how we manage that process of integrating those 150 million Eastern Europeans into the security and economic framework of Europe.
Your question, Mr. Secretary. You and Governor Bush charge that the Clinton-Gore administration have presided over the deterioration and overextension of America's armed forces. Should U.S. military personnel be deployed as warriors or peacekeepers?
My preference is to deploy them as warriors. There may be occasion when it's appropriate to use them in a peacekeeping role, but I think that role ought to be limited. I think there ought to be a time limit on it. The reason we have a military is to be able to fight and win wars, and to maintain it with sufficient strength so that would-be adversaries are deterred from ever launching a war in the first place. I think that the administration has, in fact, in this area, failed in a major responsibility. We've seen a reduction in our forces far beyond anything that was justified by the end of the Cold War. At the same time, we've seen a rapid expansion of our commitments around the world as troops have been sent hither and yon. Testimony just last week by the Joint Chiefs of Staff before the House Armed Services Committee that pointed out a lot of these problems. That for example, General Mike Ryan of the Air Force, that with 40% fewer aircraft, he's now undertaking 3 times as many deployments on a regular basis as he had to previously. So we're overcommitted and we're under-resourced. This has had some other unfortunate effects. I saw a letter, for example, the other day from a young captain stationed down in Fort Bragg, graduate of West Point of '95, getting ready to get out of the service because he's only allowed to train with his troops when fuel's available for the vehicles, and only allowed to fire their weapons twice a year. He's concerned that if he ever had to send them into combat, it would mean lives lost. That is a legitimate concern, and this is a very important area, and the fact the U.S. military is worse off today than it was 8 years ago. A major responsibility for us in the future, and a high priority for myself and Governor Bush, will be to rebuild the U.S. military, to give them the resources they need to do the job we ask them to do for us, and to give them good leadership.
Senator, you're shaking your head in disagreement.
Well, I am, Bernie, and most important, I want to assure the American people that the American military is the best trained, best equipped, most powerful force in the world, and that Al Gore and I will do whatever it takes to keep them that way. It's not right, and it's not good for our military to run them down, essentially, in the midst of a partisan political debate. The fact is that you've got to judge the military by what the military leaders say, and Secretary Bill Cohn, a good Republican, General Shelton, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, both will tell you that the American military is ready to meet any threat we may face in the world today. And the fact is, judging by its results from Desert Storm to the Balkans, Bosnia and Kosovo, to the operations that are still being conducted to keep Saddam Hussein in a box in Iraq, the American military has performed brilliantly. In fact, this administration has turned around the drop in spending on the military that began in the mid-'80s and went right through the Bush-Cheney administration and the early years of the Clinton administration, but now that's stopped. In fact, we passed the largest pay increase in a generation